So what the author says here is what we can be sure of, and I edited it. The piece was longer than this, but I was trying to just focus on the area that's relevant to this fallacy. What we can be sure of is that association does not prove cause and effect. In other words, it's easy to get a non-causa pro-causa out of it. If this had been an intervention design study, and we don't need to go into exactly what that is, where half the participants got fish oil and half didn't, and they were followed for 20 years to see if they got prostate cancer, then you can say pretty definitively that they are connected. In other words, he's saying if this study were done differently, there would be much more ground to conclude a causal connection. But he says, bottom line, this type of study does not prove cause and effect. If I did a study on sunrise and humans waking up, I would find 100% correlation, but that doesn't mean that the sun came up because you woke up. Correlation, yes. Causation, no. Right? Neither does day cause night and night cause day. Right? He says another problem with studies that researchers did not address whether the men who were studied got their omega-3 fatty acids from eating fatty fish or from taking supplements. Also, there's no regard for their health status before starting the study. In other words, see here, it's kind of interesting because you kind of get two different causal fallacies. Here he's talking about a non-causa pro-causa. In other words, just because you've got an association, just because I wore my lucky pair of socks and the Ravens won Sunday, which I didn't, but the Ravens did win. But just because there was a correlation, it doesn't mean that there really was a cause and effect relationship. So drawing an inference, a logical inference or conclusion about causation, what was the cause here, from mere correlation is one way we commit the non-causa pro-causa fallacy of specifying as a cause something that is not a cause, right? Which is what the Latin means. At least that's what I'm told it means. I went to public school. I wasn't like the other Polish kids who went to Catholic school. If I went to Catholic school, I might have had some Latin, other than e pluribus, But now look at this other one. What he's trying to say here is maybe the causal situation is much more complex than the people who wrote this study led on. In other words, here he says we don't know how they got their omega-3. Also, there was no regard for the health status of the participants in the study. In other words, maybe there were some other causes of the negative results that had to do with a prior health condition of the participant. Did they start using fish oil as a therapy once diagnosed with prostate cancer, or had they been taking it all along? So, in other words, and here we get on, and I don't know if I'll read the whole thing, but he says, and what about the myriad of other factors that can lead to the onset and progression of cancer, such as how lifestyle affects genetics, smoking, nutrition, exercise, environmental toxicity, stress? None of these things were taken into account. So note here, he could easily, if he used the language of the logic text, he could be using the charging the people who conducted this study with a simplified cause or fallacy, that they focused on one thing, the fish oil, and ignored some of the other complicated causes, that were linked. So it's trying to say this was not a good study, and it came out, I forget, actually I think trying to create a causal link between taking fish oil and prostate cancer, and he's trying to say it's not a good study, probably commits causal fallacies to do that. Well, I guess this is a good day to discuss this. I always think of bringing in a pair of precision dice, but I always forget. Can play back in tonight. In tournaments, we use precision dice. We use dice that are cut to within 1,000th of an inch tolerance, so that the actual roll of dice is what you get according to the laws of probability, and you can make good decisions. So what has that got to do with? Well, the fourth type of fallacy that he discusses under causation, bottom of 144, top of 145, is what people call gambler's fallacy. Basically, it's the fallacy of assuming that there's a causal connection that in fact does not exist between independent events. In other words, if you took, especially a pair of precision dice that are very fair dice, by definition, each time you throw the dice, the probability of throwing double sixes is exactly the same. It's 1 out of 36 possible rolls. So the thing is, every throw of the dice is independent, and the same with a roulette wheel. If it's a fair roulette wheel, say you're betting on the number 19. I don't know. I don't play roulette, but I think it goes like that. That number has the same chance of coming up each time. And what came up before does not affect what's going to come up next. Now, what is the gambler's fallacy? Well, it would be like saying, well, look, I've been standing here next to the roulette wheel, and I've looked at 15 spins of the roulette wheel, and the number 19 hasn't come up on any of them, so there ought to be more of a chance that it's going to come up next time. Or if I said, well, I haven't rolled double sixes in 10 or 15 rolls, there's much more of a chance that it's going to come up on the next roll of the dice. Well, no. See, the fallacy is assuming that independent events, like the throw of a pair of fair dice, are really causally interconnected. That what happened the last 10 times I threw the dice somehow has a causal relationship to what's going to happen on the 11th time. That's the gambler's fallacy. The gambler's fallacy is assuming there's a causal relationship when really there isn't. In other words, what happened the past 10 times has no effect, no causal relationship whatsoever in terms of what's going to happen now. If the number 19 hasn't come up on the roulette roll wheel in the past 30 turns, it's not going to affect the probability it has of coming up on the next turn, because all of the spins of the roulette wheel are causally independent of one another. They're not related. Similarly, all of the throws of a fair die or a pair of fair dice are causally unconnected, causally independent. And so, there's always the same probability each time. And what happens before, what's happened before, has no relationship. So to commit the gambler's fallacies, then, is to assume that there's some causal connection between causally independent events, like throws of a fair die, rolls of a roulette wheel, or even Keno. If you really have a fair random number generator, and supposedly you do, it shouldn't matter that the number, 50 hasn't come up in the past 15 Keno rolls, so I'm going to bet on 50 this time. It's got more of a chance of coming up. It doesn't, Well, we're not going to dwell on the gambler's fallacy, but it's easy to make causal relationships when there aren't. Sometimes in court cases, you're just in passing, your authors on 145 mentioned the Twinkie offense. Where Dan White argued that Twinkies, Coke, and potato chips caused him to kill San Francisco Mayor George Moscone, that he went into a sugar high or whatever. Lost his mind and committed murder. And so at any rate, these are instances of causal fallacies. So just to review them, the post hoc ergo propter hoc is one that you spot by looking for a time connection. It says because one event followed another in time, then the first event must have been the cause of the second one, when they may be causally unrelated. The non-causa pro causa is the kind of thing you got going on in the one in back of us, where somebody picks out something as a cause that may not be the cause at all. There's just a correlation, a coincidental correlation. And that's the kind of fallacy that those guys commit on the Budweiser ads when they assume that having the labels facing out is going to somehow causally affect how well the kicker kicks the field goal, or wearing your lucky shirt's going to help the Ravens win. And so the third one, an oversimplified cause, is also an example of what we had. It's where there are probably a number of causes contributing to a certain occurrence or a certain event. But the way you commit the fallacy of oversimplified cause is to focus on just one of those and claim that it's the cause. Funny, everything's glowing now like under blue light. Like I'm back in the 60s here, Blue light poster or something. Oh my. So So at any rate, that was one example. Well, here's one that you see a lot, and this. So now we're going past the causal fallacies, but this is similar. Some people put it in the group with the causal fallacies, and your author does. He says the fallacy of the slippery slope is a variety of the false cause fallacy. But how do you do it? Well, I mean, most of us have probably watched the Olympics at some time, right? And you see these guys on the bobsleds or the skiers at the top of the mountain. And, just a little push of that bobsled, and it goes all the way down that slippery slope to the bottom. Or a little push, off at the top of the ski slope, and it sends a skier all the way down to the bottom. Anybody ever split firewood? Well, I mean,
like with an axe and chopping it.
Like with a like with an axe.
Yeah, when I used to live in Silver Spring, we had like a real fireplace.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you split. Did you ever use a wedge? You drive this metal thing.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, sometimes in splitting firewood, you take a little metal wedge and you drive it in, and that little wedge can split. Yeah, can split a really big log. Another name for the slippery slope fallacy is called wedge argument. The idea is you get a little wedge in there and you can open up a really big hole, or you can split a big log. But it's basically the same. It leads to the same thing, whichever metaphor you use. The idea is you're arguing that if we, like, say, in terms of a public policy decision, if we start. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so real life example for that would be like slippery slope argument. Say recycling 1.5 to stop global warming. Like recycling a bottle a day to stop global warming. Is that slippery slope argument?
Not quite. Because basically, what you're arguing you're not just making the causal connection in the slippery slope argument, but you're kind of saying once we start down a certain road, we're going to go to. Now a good example though might be and you see Al Gore and people talking about a tipping point. The thought is that if we load the atmosphere to a certain point with carbon, we may have passed the point of no return, where we'll have a runaway reaction and we won't be able to reverse it. There's a good movie about this, even though I'm not so sure about the science behind it, but it was out a few years ago. The Day After Tomorrow, where they talk about the fact that at some point there might be a saturation point from which there's no turning back, that things are going to go all the way to disaster. And so that's essentially the way you reason in the slippery slope fallacy is once we start down a certain road, we're not going to be able to stop ourselves. One step in a certain direction is going to lead to a really catastrophic result. And of course, you know, the thing to keep in mind is the image of that it just takes a small push down a slippery slope to go all the way to the bottom, you know. And, you know, sometimes it's called a domino argument, but, so, if you argue that one change, like, I mean, now there definitely are people who would like to see all firearms being confiscated, but it might be a bit of a slippery slope argument to say, well, all we have to do is start with this assault weapons ban, and this will ultimately lead to government confiscation of all firearms. In other words, once we start down that slippery slope, we're not going to be able to stop. There's an ethical argument made against legalizing what's called active euthanasia. That's a slippery slope argument, and see, here's the thing. Some slippery slope arguments might be good arguments, some aren't, and people can disagree on this, but some people have argued that if we start to legalize euthanasia, that is active euthanasia, not just pulling the plug and letting nature take its course, but mercy killing using a lethal drug or something. Once we maybe allow it for say a cancer patient in severe pain or something like that, or somebody with Lou Gehrig's disease. The thought is that maybe we go all the way down to instead of just allowing it, to arguing that people need to do the right thing, and if their illness is causing the state a lot of money, or costing the state a lot of money, maybe we ought to just, put pressure on them to opt for euthanasia. Excuse me, sorry. Scratchy throat. So you can see where the slope goes. Well, all we have to do is legalize it in a few cases, and it's going to go all the way to where we're going to have full-blown involuntary euthanasia, going on, So, of course, the argument is don't start. Pretty much the point of making a slippery slope argument is once we start on a course of action or once we implement a policy, it's going to lead to a really disastrous result. So don't even start, some slippery slope arguments, though, as I said, turn out to be legitimate arguments. You've got the examples in your text, but can people see why it's a fallacy? Because the point is you're making assumptions about a whole causal sequence of events that may not be good assumptions. It may, things may not lead to the end result that we predict, and so but with slippery slope fallacies, it's pretty easy to see, to identify what they're supposed to be. You know, here you're looking not only for an isolated cause, but a series, a sort of chain of events in a slippery slope argument. And so, you know, they give an argument about what disastrous things are going to result if we don't outlaw pornography. But I think at the top of 147 it says, deciding whether a slippery slope fallacy has been committed can be difficult when one is uncertain whether the alleged chain reaction will or will not occur. You know, but the question is, you know, is there maybe merely an emotional conviction, or can somebody say more about why they think the causal relationship is really there? You know, so that's the slippery slope argument, and you see these fairly often. I think I had one here. Let me. I didn't open the other thing. I've got one down the line. Okay, talk now. Okay, look at that. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought I had a pretty obvious example in this. Well, okay. Well, I'm not gonna look at this. I was pretty sure I had a slippery slope argument, but oh, okay. Well, yeah, there were, yeah, here's a good one that I picked out from the health care law debate, because some people were arguing that if we allow something like the individual mandate, then, in other words, if we allow government to say you must buy this or that privately produced product, then where's it going to stop? If the individual mandate that we all purchase health insurance is deemed constitutional, what sorts of things does Darren Babbs imply would be the inevitable result? See, I'm trying to give people a hint on this. This was actually a test question, in the past year that I made. That I used to have to make a lot of them up because there wasn't as good a test bank with Copy. Would be the slide in this direction have any logical limit in his opinion? What fallacy would this reasoning commit and why? Now of course, the fallacy I was looking there was the slippery slope fallacy. So here's what they say. We're going to represent the extremes of Commerce Clause jurisprudence. Neither compels the court to hold that an individual mandate falls into the same line of cases. In fact, the court would be pushing its interpretation of the Commerce Clause to a whole new level if it found the individual mandate to be constitutional. It was under the Commerce Clause that the administration argued they could force everybody to purchase health insurance, that they could institute. But now here's the slippery slope. If the individual mandate for Obamacare is deemed constitutional, Congress could mandate that people buy cars, video games, or any other good or service because those purchases would help the interstate market for those goods or services. It would create an absurd result with no logical limit. So you see what the argument is there? Once we allow the government to force people to purchase a product, in this case health insurance, where's it going to stop? You know, is there going to be a slippery slope where the government then forces us to buy all kinds of different products? Well, so far that prediction has not happened. You know, although I know there are some very environmentally conscious people who would love to force us all to buy hybrid vehicles or electric vehicles, but whether or not that's going to really happen, I don't know. You know, so in other words, it seems like this prediction that if we allow it to happen in this isolated case, that's going to lead to the slippery slope of the government mandating that we buy all kinds of different goods under the penalty of law. It just doesn't seem like that. You know.
How come that wouldn't be again?
Oh. Well, I was talking about slippery slope, but what? Oh,
Like,
no.
How many would get confused?
What is it?
Like, what? But that's just like say that that's what I'm at.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's independent. Yeah. Well, see, the gambler's fallacy and the slippery slope do have this in common. In the gambler's fallacy, you take independent events, causally independent events, that all have the same probability, like the rolls of the fair dice, you know, and you try to make a causal connection that connects those independent events, and that's what enables you to commit the fallacy by saying, well, there's more of a chance of my rolling double sixes on this roll because I haven't rolled it in the past 15 rolls, and it's about due because one's going to come up every 36 times, right? Every 37. Whereas it's causally independent. There's a 1 out of 36 chance every time I throw it. So it doesn't matter that in the past 15 rolls I haven't rolled a double six. That does not affect whether or not I'm going to roll one on the next roll. And in the slippery slope argument, there again you take possibly independent events and you say there's a causal connection. But usually it's you're expanding the intensity of stuff, right? From this one thing, we purchase health insurance under a mandate, you're kind of saying, well, they're going to expand it to more and more and more products. You know, that there's a causal relationship that says once we start down the road of allowing the government to mandate that we purchase any product, that's going to end in the slippery slope of the government mandating all sorts of things. You know, so you are taking events that are probably not causally related, and in both of the fallacies, you're trying to connect them. But the key is that in the slippery slope argument, you're suggesting that there's an increase in intensity or in magnitude of what's going to happen. You know, that because now you know the ski is also gaining, is also going fast. But you're saying once we start down a given path, it's going to end at a really, you know, critical thing. So I don't know if that's going to be helpful. I mean, they are similar, but what I'm saying is one of them just tries to connect together independent events, and the other one, yeah, I don't want to make you all late. And the other one basically says things are going to get worse and worse and worse. Okay. We'll continue on next time. Yeah, let me go stop the recording so we don't